We're going to look at the classical approach and how through classical economics we would fix an underperforming economy. Obviously, an underperforming economy is one where there's a recessionary gap. So we're going to start off with a $200 billion recessionary gap. The classical school of economic thought still exists today. It was founded basically 200 years ago, or 250 years ago almost. A very famous book by Adam Smith came out in 1776. He wrote this during the English Industrial Revolution. So during this time, aggregate supply was extremely strong. Going forward, it was increasing quite rapidly. So the classical theory says that anytime that we deviate from our full employment level of real GDP, anytime that we are not on our long-run aggregate supply curve over here, it will be short, minor, and the market will be able to self-correct. So the classical theory believes that the least amount of government intervention is the best amount of government intervention. Definitely a laissez-faire economics approach. So let's just summarize the classical theory for a second. So classical theory. This is also called the long-run approach. Okay, so the classical theory rests on basically three different pillars of the model, and if these three pillars hold, then the classical theory says we don't need government intervention. We can get back to full employment level of real GDP on our own. The first one is called Say's law. Say's law is kind of the if you build it, they will come idea of economics. Say's law says that supply will create its own demand. So this is a little bit overly simplified. It really means that the act of creating goods, the act of supplying an economy with goods, creates the same amount of income necessary to purchase those goods and services that the economy has produced. And if you think about this in a closed economy with no international trade and no savings, this definitely would hold. If you pay people $100,000 to produce goods and services and you price those goods and services at $100,000, then their consumption will use up all of the production. Their consumption will purchase all of the production that they just created. As soon as there's savings in the economy, this doesn't hold. If there's savings, then the production will start to accumulate in terms of inventory, and as inventory increases, suppliers are going to have to reduce the amount supplied. So Say's law is slightly overly simplistic. The next pillar is what's called the loanable funds market. Now, the loanable funds market simply converts savings into investments. So this takes kind of piggybacks the idea of if there are savings in Say's law, we can still have full consumption and we can still use all of that production because anything that is saved, somebody else will take that loan out and buy the rest of those goods and services. Okay? And the last pillar is that prices and wages are completely flexible. So it's price, wage, flexibility. So this assumption says that prices and wages are equally as likely to go up as they are to go down. There are no sticky prices. There are no sticky wages. This is crucial for the market to self-correct. Prices and wages have to be flexible in order for the market to self-correct, and we'll see what this means. So basically, in theory, if we have aggregate demand being less than aggregate supply at some price level, so basically if the price level is down, if the price level is up here and aggregate demand is over here and aggregate supply is over here, then firms are either going to decrease supply or they're possibly going to decrease their price in order to get all of their inventory sold. Well, as some firms decrease their price, other firms have to follow because of competition. So now if the prices fall, workers will need to take lower wages in order to keep their jobs because firms aren't making as much money. So with this price wage flexibility, as the wages fall, firms are going to be able to, after firms lower their prices, they're going to need to reduce their wages. Well, workers are not going to be harmed in taking lower wages because that's just the nominal wage going down. Their real wage won't change because as their wage falls and the price level falls, they'll still be allowed to buy the same amount of goods and services. Firms are also not going to be harmed because it's only their nominal price falling. So basically, real wealth and real profits will be preserved because the prices and wages will be flexible. As one falls, the other falls. As one increases, the other increases. So using these three things, Say's law, loanable funds market, and price and wage flexibility, how does the classical theory say that our market is going to get back to full employment with, with an underperforming economy? Well, the classical theorists believe that it's all going to be in the hands of the short-run aggregate supply, that the producers and the production in the market needs to increase. It has nothing to do with the aggregate demand curve shifting. We'll just be moving along our aggregate demand curve to a higher quantity demanded. So basically, according to the classical theorist, somehow we're going to need to get our aggregate supply curve to shift to the right to bring us to full employment. So let's see, how is that going to happen? Well, let's look at what's going on in the market. If our full employment level of real GDP is higher than what we are currently producing, that means that we have excess unemployment. If we have excess unemployment, we don't have enough people working. Our unemployment level is above full employment. Okay, so we are above the 4 to 6% threshold of unemployment. So maybe we have 7% unemployment. Maybe we have 8% unemployment. As we have higher and higher unemployment, it's going to put downward pressure on wages. In order for individuals to keep their jobs, they're going to have to accept lower nominal wages. Through the classical theory, as they accept lower nominal wages, their real wealth is still going to be preserved because with lower nominal wages, they're still going to be able to buy the same goods and services because the prices are going to fall. So let's see if this happens. As there's pressure on wages to start to fall, production costs start to fall. Since wages are 70% of production costs, there's going to be a decrease in production costs. Production costs are falling. Okay, so what happens to firms when the cost of producing goods and services goes down? Well, this causes an increase for potential profits. If firms can increase their profits and increase the amount of money that they're able to make, there's now an incentive to increase output or increase production, which is ultimately going to lead to an increase in our short-run aggregate supply curve. As firms increase profits, that means that the short-run aggregate supply curve is in fact increasing, so it would be shifting to the right. So without government intervention, the classical theorists say that our short-run aggregate supply curve can bring us to our full employment level of real GDP without any government intervention whatsoever. So basically, we have reached our full employment level of real GDP. We have reached the point of equilibrium. Our short-run aggregate supply 1 is shifting. It's to the right of our original short-run aggregate supply curve. So all of these things have happened and we've reached equilibrium without government intervention. Okay, so according to the classical theory, Any deviation will be short, minor, and self-correcting. We will be back at our full employment level of real GDP without any intervention from the government.